Pat was in her late 50s and had been working in Brown's grocer ever since she left school. She was about as permanent a fixture as the business itself. She was also the example Elle's parents liked to use whenever they tried to discuss their daughter's future, or lack of one. "Do you want to end up like Patricia Adams?" Elle didn't think ending up like Pat was the worst thing that could happen to a person. Pat was single, she had a steady job and a cat she adored, and everyone loved her. But to Caroline and Elle Kinnaird, it was a fate worse than death. To them, Pat was a lonely old spinster who had never left Jessop's Creek and was doomed to die alone alongside her cat. Caroline and Alistair were a Jessop's Creek success story. They were high school sweethearts who left town to go to university. Alistair had become a doctor and Caroline an accountant. They married and returned to their hometown to set up businesses and raise a family. They'd had 3 perfect children who followed in their footsteps. First Lauren, who went into law, then Lachlan, an engineer, and Malcolm, who was studying biomedical science. And then there was Elspeth. She had never really fitted into the family mould. For starters, she was the only redhead. It was some kind of throwback, apparently. Gran had always said Elle was lucky, that inheriting her Scottish genes was a blessing. But as a kid, Elle considered her red hair and freckles a curse. She was so different to her siblings that growing up she often wondered when her parents would sit her down and break the news that she was adopted. They never did, and now that she was 24, she assumed they would have done it by now if they were ever going to. It wasn't as if Elle hadn't tried to fit in. She'd done her best. She'd even gone to university, partly to keep the peace, but mostly because, more than anything, she wanted to make her parents proud. Unlike her siblings, though, she had no career in mind, and it only took 2 semesters for her to realise that being an accountant was not for her. Her lecturer suggested changing some subjects, which she did, picking up an art elective, which went a long way to making life bearable. Elle had always loved to draw and paint. It was the one thing she could do to escape everything going on around her. She had toyed with the idea of switching to art school. She researched it and went as far as presenting the idea to her parents. But in the end, she had been talked out of it. "You need security, Elspeth," her mother had said. "A reliable career." Gran had been the only one who encouraged her. "If art is where your heart is, then you should follow it," she'd argued when a tearful Elle had come home between semesters. "I can't. Mum and Dad won't let me," she'd sniffed, wiping her eyes. "This is your life, your decision." "They've already said they won't pay for art school." "So, get a job and pay your own way. I can lend you some money if you need it," Gran had suggested. The idea had been tempting, but the more she'd pictured herself at art school, the more easily she could hear the arguments and imagine the frosty silences she would have to endure throughout her studies, and probably for a long time afterwards. Elle didn't do confrontation. She liked to keep the peace and not rock any boats. So she'd kept her head down and did her best to stick with the university course. She'd managed 2 years before giving up. Mostly, she'd missed the peace and quiet of Jessop's Creek. She wasn't cut out to be a city girl, and studying was not for her. So she'd come home and listen to her parents' concerned lectures before getting a job at Brown's to think over her options. That had been 3 years ago. Elle liked the work for the most part. The oldies who shopped there had been loyal customers all their lives, and there was a tight-knit community feel about Brown's. It was more than just a grocery store, more than the soulless big chain supermarkets she'd visited in the city. This was a place where locals gathered for a catch-up and a yarn. People smiled as they passed each other in the aisles and waited patiently in line at the checkout. Even the car park was civilized, no horns blaring or arguments over who got a spot first. Elle got to talk to people all day. Sometimes she suspected she was the only person some of the elderly people saw. She loved to make them smile and listen to them.